A 22.8% interest rate is quietly draining modern household wealth, yet we cannot stop tapping our screens. Your brain's financial defense system has been hacked by digital payment platforms, but is chronic overspending a failure of personal willpower? Or have you fallen into a biological trap deliberately engineered against you? Frictionless digital checkouts drive a staggering 95% spending increase compared to physical cash, making this psychological trap undeniable. Let us start by looking closely at the primitive biology of buying. When you hand over a crisp paper banknote for coffee, your brain registers physical discomfort. Neurological studies prove parting with physical cash directly activates the insula, serving as a 95% natural defense against overspending. This is the exact same pain center in your brain that lights up when you stub your toe. It is a highly evolved defense mechanism designed to make you evaluate whether the item is truly worth the resources you are giving up. Society tells us moving to digital payments is just everyday convenience, but when you look closely at that 95% spending increase, the underlying picture changes. Credit cards and mobile wallets act as a biometric mute on your brain's natural pain response. This transaction decoupling fundamentally explains that staggering 95% spending gap between cash and digital buyers. It is the psychological separation of the joy of acquiring a new product from the biological consequence of paying for it. You get the dopamine hit of the purchase today, but the neurological pain of the payment is pushed into an invisible future. For anyone trying to understand how money works, this perfectly explains why avoiding that 22.8% interest rate becomes psychologically impossible. To fully grasp why this decoupling happens on a massive scale, we must look at something seemingly unrelated. This brings us directly to the modern digital layaway system known as buy now, pay later. A staggering 46% cart size increase consistently occurs the very moment a consumer is offered the option to split their purchase at checkout. The mainstream narrative insists giving consumers the option of a 4-payment transaction split simply provides helpful flexibility. But when you actively examine underlying consumer behavior, the dangerous complication becomes entirely obvious. Our brains intuitively categorize invisible digital credit entirely differently from the hard-earned money sitting safely in our checking accounts. This psychological blind spot, which easily drives a 46% cart size increase, is a widely studied phenomenon known as mental accounting. When you take a large purchase and break it down into 4 smaller fractions, your conscious mind abruptly stops processing the total mathematical cost. This perfectly explains the 95% spending surge, as the frictionless checkout process creates an artificial separation between the immediate consumption of goods and the delayed realization of their true economic cost. This explains exactly why hardworking people constantly feel like the financial system is working against them. They are unknowingly trapped in a digital environment, driving a 95% spending increase simply by hiding the true weight of daily consumption. When millions of consumers fall into this exact same psychological trap simultaneously, it fundamentally alters macroeconomic pricing dynamics. It allows them to quietly raise prices across the board without triggering the usual consumer backlash. This is precisely why ordinary people sharply feel the sting of rising living costs, yet macro spending data, heavily inflated by that 46% cart size increase, consistently remains perplexingly high. This brings us directly to the real elephant in the room, the compounding cost of deferred financial pain. Eventually, the delayed biological bill always comes due, usually arriving in the mail with that brutal 22.8% interest rate penalty rigidly attached. The widespread normalization of revolving credit deeply alters standard consumer mental accounting. High-interest consumer debt, even at 22.8%, is no longer viewed as a severe financial emergency. Instead, individuals are conditioned to passively view this expensive debt as just another routine monthly utility bill. You simply pay the minimum balance and ignore the massive wealth transfer happening quietly in the background. Suppressing the physical pain of paying directly correlates with that 46% larger cart size and unprecedented household debt accumulation. So, how do we intentionally add defensive friction back into our daily spending habits to effectively reverse this psychological trick? The answer lies in a highly practical behavioral experiment. I directly challenge you to conduct a strict cash-only weekend to permanently break this 95% spending increase. For a continuous 48-hour duration, firmly leave your credit cards, smartwatches, and digital mobile wallets entirely at home. Force yourself to use only physical paper bills for all daily purchases, from your morning coffee to your weekend groceries. When you physically hand over a $20 currency denomination to a retail cashier, pay very close attention to exactly how you feel. This affects you deeply when you notice how much harder it is to physically part with a $20 paper bill compared to carelessly tapping a piece of plastic. Is chronic overspending just a lack of personal discipline, or is it actually something much more profound? The honest truth is that chronic overspending, often driven by a 22.8% interest cycle, is not purely a lack of traditional budgeting skills. Credit cards essentially act as a biometric mute, cleverly tricking you into separating the immediate joy of buying from the painful financial consequence of a 4-payment split. In a world obsessively focused on removing every ounce of friction from the retail checkout line, friction is actually your single greatest financial asset. Within the next 10 years, this total erasure of payment friction will inevitably cause an unprecedented depletion of household savings globally. Ultimately, navigating this digital trap will force every single one of us to thoroughly redefine what it truly means to afford the modern lives we are living. But I want to hear your personal take. Do you routinely find yourself spending more money when using a digital wallet instead of handing over physical cash? Let me know in the comments. So hit subscribe so you won't miss what's next, and jump straight to the next video, because that could be the very insight you need to get ahead.